Every family hides secrets, but mine kept theirs wrapped under Christmas lights and holiday cheer, pretending everything was picture perfect while quietly tearing me apart piece by piece. I thought I was just going to another family dinner, another night of forced smiles and fake toasts. But what waited at that table wasn't a celebration, it was a carefully staged humiliation. What none of them knew, what they never imagined, was that before the night was over, the very person they tried to erase would end up holding the deed to the house, the fortune, and the future they thought was theirs. This is not just a story about betrayal. It's about how far people will go to bury the truth and what happens when the truth finally digs itself free. If that already has you hooked, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what you think so far and where you're watching from. I promise you'll want to see how this one ends. My name is Connor Blake. I'm 28 years old, work warehouse night shifts 6 days a week, and live in a one-bedroom rental over a laundromat that always smells like detergent and broken dreams. I don't wear fancy suits, just flannel, faded jeans, and boots that have seen more winters than I care count. Growing up, I used to believe Christmas was magic. Then adulthood, and more specifically, my family, cured me of that delusion. For the last 3 years, I haven't been home for the holidays. Not since Thanksgiving, when my father told me during grace that failure doesn't belong at a table of progress. Harsh, maybe. Surprising? Not at all. That's the way things go when you grow up in a family where love is conditional on achievement, and I apparently failed the admission test. Last week, a text came in. No name, just a message. Connor, you should come to the house for Christmas dinner. It's time. No context, no emojis, just those words. At first, I ignored it, but it haunted me. The way it was phrased, it's time, made it feel final, almost like a warning or a countdown. Against my better judgment, I drove 6 hours through snow and black ice from Cleveland to the suburbs where I grew up. My hand was still shaking when I pulled into the driveway of the house I hadn't seen since I left in a screaming match. The same lights, same wreath, same smug brick facade, and yet something was off. As I approached the door, I felt more like a trespasser than a son returning. I rang the bell, expecting a wait. Instead, the door swung open instantly. My mother, Linda Blake, stood in a crimson dress that matched her lipstick and her temper. "Connor," she said, feigning warmth. "Look who decided to show up." Her eyes scanned me, pausing at the creases in my jacket and the snow on my boots. She stepped aside without a hug. I entered. The house smelled of roast beef, cinnamon, and polished lies. A golden chandelier sparkled above the dining table, which was already full. Everyone was seated, relatives, family friends, neighbors I barely recognized, but no place was set for me. Not a chair, not even a coaster. I stood frozen near the entryway as the living room erupted into applause. For a split second, I thought, foolishly, it might be for me. Maybe they were happy I was here. Maybe this year will be different. Then I turned. A massive banner unfurled from the second floor railing. "Congratulations, Tyler. New homeowner." Below it, a life-size photo of my younger brother Tyler, standing on this very porch holding a key, grinned like a real estate ad. My stomach dropped. Before I could even react, the lights flickered and a projector lit up the far wall with a slideshow. Tyler's closing papers, selfies with the real estate agent, a photo of him signing a contract at the kitchen counter. The same kitchen I used to do homework in while Mom criticized my penmanship. Tyler raised a glass. Thank you," he said to the room, loud and smug. "Officially closed last week. Big step for me. Couldn't wait to share it with my people." My father clapped him on the back. "You've earned it," he said. "You've always had that business instinct. This house needs a man who understands value." My mother chimed in. "We just knew he was the right one for it. His vision, his energy, it's perfect." No one looked at me. I wasn't even acknowledged, as the former child who grew up here, who used to mow that lawn, fix that leaky sink, repaint the back fence every summer. I was standing in my own past, and they'd scrub me out of it like a stain. I took a slow step toward the table, hoping maybe someone would shuffle over, make room. But no one moved. I heard one of my cousins whisper, "Awkward," and cover a laugh with her wine glass. Aunt Meredith, bless her, approached with a tight smile and a plate of cookies. "Connor," she said gently, "it's good to see you. No seat, huh? Maybe grab one from the garage." The garage. That's where the folding chairs were kept. That's where they stored junk, forgotten decorations, and now, apparently, me. As I turned to obey, Tyler called out, "Don't worry, big bro. You're always welcome. Just, late to the party, as usual." The crowd laughed. I swallowed bile. I should have left then. I should have walked right back out that door, climbed in my old beater of a car, and driven until the memories blurred. But something in me needed to see it through. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the same masochism that makes people read hateful comments about themselves. Whatever it was, I stepped back into the dining room, clutching a folding chair from the garage like a warrior bringing his own shield to battle. The second I walked in, Tyler noticed and smirked. "There he is," he said, raising his wine glass. "The man, the myth, the legend." Everyone chuckled. My father, seated next to him at the head of the table, raised an eyebrow. "You still with that delivery job, Connor?" he asked, loud enough for the guests to hear. "I hear the tips are better than the paycheck." Smart. The sarcasm was sharp, effortless. I placed a chair at the farthest corner of the table and sat down, ignored by everyone around me. Conversation flowed, laughter rose, and I sat there in a silence thick enough to swallow me whole. Then the lights dimmed, and my mother stood, holding a wireless microphone. "Before we eat," she began, "we thought it would be nice to share something special with all of you. A little look back at our family's journey through the years." My stomach clenched. A projector flickered to life, casting images onto the white wall behind her. Childhood photos, family trips, graduations, holidays. Every picture was perfectly arranged and meticulously edited. I watched, stone-faced, as image after image flashed by. There I was, age 10, at the Grand Canyon. Except in this version, I wasn't there. They had cropped me out. A ski trip from high school. Originally, I'd stood between Tyler and our cousin Amanda. Now, just the two of them, standing where I had once belonged. Even my high school graduation photo, which had once been framed in the hallway, had been replaced with Tyler's college acceptance celebration. My hands gripped the sides of the chair. My face burned. No one else seemed fazed. They clapped, they smiled, they turned to Tyler with admiration in their eyes. Then the slideshow ended, and the lights came back on. "Wasn't that beautiful?" my mom said, wiping away a non-existent tear. "We're so proud of how far we've come." She turned to me, as if only now realizing I existed. "Oh, and Connor, we didn't forget you." She reached under the table and pulled out a small envelope. I took it slowly. It was thin, light. I opened it. Inside was a printed voucher for a 3-session emotional clarity package at a local therapy clinic. A sticky note was attached. "Maybe this can help you find your path." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Around me, the table erupted into polite laughter, the kind that disguises cruelty in sophistication. "Self-improvement is the best gift," someone muttered. "They say therapy's really useful these days." Tyler leaned in from across the table, voice low and mocking. "Merry Christmas, big bro." I stared at the envelope. 3 therapy sessions. That was their idea of a gift. Not a sweater, not a book, not even socks. Just a subtle way to say I was broken, and they all knew it. The next round of presents started. One by one, people opened beautifully wrapped boxes with labels that sparkled in gold ink. My father received a vintage watch from Tyler, and in return gifted him a leather briefcase embossed with his initials. My mother unwrapped a pearl necklace. Even the neighbors got Bluetooth speakers and gift cards to upscale restaurants. Every name was called with ceremony. Every unwrapping met with applause. Every exchange steeped in adoration and false modesty. My name was never called. No box had my name on it. No one looked my way. I sat with the therapy voucher crumpling between my fingers, sweat forming on my palms. A breeze from the hallway brushed against me, cold like reality. I was an observer at my own funeral, watching my family bury me in smiles and social cues. When the last gift was opened, my father stood and tapped his glass. "Let's raise a toast," he said, to Tyler, for taking the next step, for leading by example, for showing us what the future looks like. Everyone stood, glasses raised. Except me. I sat still, my throat tight, heart pounding. My mother noticed and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You should smile," she whispered. "This is a happy night." Then she leaned closer and added, "Don't ruin it." I looked at her, and for a moment, I saw her not as my mother, but as a woman playing a role. Elegant, poised, untouchable. She hadn't invited me because she missed me. She invited me so I could see exactly what I was missing, so I could witness my replacement in full regalia. I turned to Tyler, who was now shaking hand with a guest from Dad's firm. He looked over and winked. There was no mistaking it. This dinner wasn't about family. It was a presentation, a theater production designed to humiliate the character no one wanted in the spotlight anymore. But there was something magnetic about humiliation. It draws you in, challenges you to pretend you're not drowning in it. As I turned back toward the living room, I heard the clinking of forks against glasses and my name rising from the din like a cruel chant. "Connor," someone called. "Speech." I stopped mid-step. "What speech?" "That's right," my mother said, her voice syrupy sweet, floating over the crowd. "Our eldest son has finally joined us for a holiday. We should hear from him, don't you think?" The guests clapped, not warmly, but with the enthusiasm of an audience at a talent show waiting to be amused. My stomach twisted. Tyler raised a wireless microphone and held it out like a game show host. "Come on, Connor," he said with a grin. "You're the big brother. Tell us what Christmas means to you." I should have refused. I should have kept walking. But something bitter in me decided to play along, to give them what they wanted, even if it cost me my pride. I walked back into the room and took the mic, my hands slightly trembling. The house went quiet. All eyes turned toward me. I looked at the sea of faces, smiling, smirking, expectant. "Well," I began, "this is unexpected." A few chuckles. I took a breath, trying to settle my nerves, to find some sense of grounding. "Christmas," I said, "used to mean home. It used to mean sitting by the fire, drinking hot cocoa, waiting for Mom's pie to come out of the oven. It meant being with the people who mattered most." I paused. The microphone made no sound. I tapped it. Nothing. I looked at Tyler. He shrugged innocently, mouthed something I couldn't hear. My father stood from the head of the table, took a sip of wine, and said in a booming voice, "Maybe it's better this way. Learn when to stay silent, just like you've done all your life." Laughter exploded around the room like firecrackers. Some guests covered their mouths. Others laughed openly. My mother shook her head with a tight smile, like she'd just watched a child fumble a piano recital. I froze. My ears rang. I lowered the mic, switched off or never turned on, and stood there in the middle of the room with nothing but their eyes on me. I was no longer a guest. I was the night's entertainment. "You're doing great," Tyler added, smirking. "Keep going. I'm sure we're all learning something." I looked directly at him. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who cried when he scraped his knee and looked up to me to fix everything. That boy was gone. In his place was a man who knew exactly how to win affection, how to dominate a room, how to use charm like a blade. The silence stretched. Okay, I finally said, handing the mic back to him. You win. Tyler gave an exaggerated bow and whispered, I always do. I walked back to my folding chair, but when I arrived, it had been moved. Someone had folded it and leaned it against the wall. My spot was gone again. I stood awkwardly, hoping someone would offer a seat. No one did. The conversation resumed as if I had never stood up, never spoken, never existed. I stepped back, blending into the shadows near the window, the hum of laughter wrapping around me like a chokehold. At the far end of the room, one of the uncles who barely remembered my name raised his glass and said, To family. Everyone cheered. I watched Tyler clink glasses with my father, both of them grinning like they had just conquered something. Maybe they had. My mother whispered something to one of her church friends, and the woman glanced my way, then chuckled behind her hand. I wondered what story she'd just heard. Was I the troubled son, the dropout, the disappointment who came crawling back? Probably all three. One of the younger cousins approached, holding a plate of pie. Want some? She asked, looking up at me with innocent eyes. It's peppermint chocolate, Tyler's favorite. I smiled, forcing my voice to stay even. No thanks, sweetheart. I've had enough. She skipped away, and I watched her disappear into the crowd that had already moved on from me. I turned toward the window again, the frost forming delicate patterns on the glass. I pressed a hand to it, just to feel something cold and real. Outside, snow fell quietly, muffling the world beyond. And then I saw him again, that same shadowed figure standing near the edge of the yard, partially hidden behind a tree. Long coat, motionless, watching. This time I didn't blink. I stepped closer to the window. The figure didn't move, but I sensed something familiar in the posture, something I couldn't quite place. Before I could react, the curtains were drawn suddenly from behind me. My father stood there. The living room buzzed with post-toast chatter, and I stood on the fringe like a ghost whose haunting went unnoticed. That's when Tyler approached, his hands in his pockets and a casual, disarming grin stretched across his face. Hey, he said, leaning close like we were lifelong buddies, sharing a private joke. Come talk with me for a sec? I didn't respond, but I followed him out of the room, through the hallway, and into the den, which had been converted over the years from a library into something more resembling a personal trophy room for Tyler's accomplishments. Framed articles about his small business startup lined the walls. A ribbon from a half marathon he didn't even finish was mounted behind glass. And there, on the mantle, hung the updated family portrait, the one I hadn't seen up close until now. I walked toward it slowly, drawn like a magnet to a memory gone wrong. My eyes scanned each face, Dad standing tall with his arm around Mom, both smiling stiffly. Tyler in the middle, perfect posture, hand in his blazer pocket, chin lifted just so. And then the space where I once stood, still occupied by my silhouette, but my nameplate underneath had been crossed out with a thick black permanent marker. Not even erased. Scratched through. My breath hitched in my throat, and I could feel Tyler watching me with that same smug amusement he wore all night. Yeah, he said, stepping beside me. Dad thought it was a nice touch. You know, symbolic. I didn't speak. I just stared at the defaced photo, the insult so deliberate, so permanent, it almost stunned me into silence. Tyler clapped a hand on my shoulder like we were old friends again. Look, he said, voice suddenly shifting into something softer, more serious, more serpentine. You've been gone a while, and a lot has changed. People move on. They adjust. You know how it is. I turned to face him, jaw tight. They adjusted by pretending I never existed. He laughed, short, sharp. Come on, don't be dramatic. It's not like we forgot you. You were just absent, and people fill those gaps. That's how families work. His eyes flicked back to the portrait, then back to me. But you being here tonight, it's poetic, really. Poetic, I asked, the word dry in my mouth. He nodded. Yeah, closure. This isn't a reunion, Connor. It's a farewell party. You just didn't realize it. The words hit me like a slap. My fist clenched, but I kept my voice steady. So through this whole night, the banner, the slideshow, the voucher, the speech, it was all just to rub it in. Tyler's expression didn't change. What did you expect? That you'd show up and suddenly be forgiven, embraced, welcomed back with open arms? This house is mine now. I earned it. I did the work. You walked away years ago, and now you want back in like nothing happened. I didn't walk away, I snapped. I was pushed out. He smirked, cocking his head. Maybe, but either way, you're out. And that's the way it's going to stay. He leaned a little closer. So do yourself a favor and stop clinging to this delusion. You're not coming back into this family. He gestured to the room around us. This is my story now. I took a step back, blood pounding in my ears. You're not half the man you pretend to be. Tyler smiled, unbothered. Maybe, but pretending works when everyone else believes it. Look around, Connor. Who's clapping? Who's cheering? Who's sitting at the table? I stared at him, the rage inside me boiling. But then something else caught my attention. A dusty, framed picture tucked on the bottom shelf, partially hidden behind a stack of Tyler's business pamphlets. I stepped past him and picked it up. It was a photo from Christmas 12 years ago, back when we still had a dog, back when Mom used to bake cookies with me in the kitchen, back when Dad still ruffled my hair without flinching. In the picture, Tyler was mid-laugh, our dog lunging playfully at him. I stood in the background, holding a gift with a ribbon crookedly tied, grinning like the happiest idiot in the world. That photo hadn't been altered. My name was still scribbled on the back in Mom's cursive. I held it tight. Tyler scoffed. Digging up relics now? What's the plan? Guilt tripped the family into giving you a pity seat at the table. I put the frame down and turned to face him. No, I said, just remembering who I was before all of this. Well, he said, clapping his hands once, snap out of it. You're not that kid anymore. And no one here is interested in your nostalgia tour. You're right, I replied. They're not. But someone is. His brow furrowed slightly, the first crack in his armor. I didn't elaborate. Someone had dimmed the lights, and the music had turned soft and nostalgic, the kind of instrumental Christmas melodies that played in department stores or over speakers in hospital waiting rooms. My mother clapped her hands gently and called everyone into the center of the living room. It's tradition, she announced. We always hold hands and sing carols before dessert, just like when the boys were little. Everyone responded with warm nods and smiles, moving furniture aside to create a circle in the middle of the space. I stood at the edge, unsure whether to step forward or quietly slip back into the shadows. My mother passed by me, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, and paused just long enough to give me a quick, tight smile. Join us, Connor, she said, not warmly, not sincerely, but like a director giving stage directions to an understudy. I stepped forward, but before I could reach the others, they had already joined hands. The circle had formed, and there was no room left between the guests. I stood awkwardly, facing a wall of linked arms and polite avoidance. Across from me, Tyler caught my eye and gave a small shrug as if to say, oops. I glanced to my right. Aunt Meredith and Cousin David were holding hands, heads bowed slightly. To my left, the neighbor couple from next door stood arm in arm, humming softly already. There was no space, no opening, and no one moved to make one. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. The piano began to play from the speaker system, and voices rose together in an uneven but heartfelt rendition of Silent Night. I stood frozen, a foot outside the circle, watching a room full of people pretend that my exclusion was a coincidence, that I was simply late, or shy, or too tired to participate. I wasn't late. I wasn't shy. I was intentionally forgotten. My mother walked past me again, this time holding a folded napkin in her hand. She brushed by me gently and slipped the napkin into my coat pocket with a subtle motion so smooth I almost didn't notice. I turned slightly confused and met her eyes just long enough to see a flicker of something in her expression. Not guilt, not concern, just cold resolve. The song continued, voices filling the space that used to be mine, and I reached into my pocket. The napkin had been wrapped around a folded envelope. I unfolded it slowly and recognized the hospital logo on the top right corner. My heart dropped. It was a billing statement. I scanned it quickly. Intensive care unit charges, medication breakdown, totals exceeding 6 figures. It was for Grandpa Walter, dated nearly a year ago. At the bottom, in smaller print, it read, Primary Responsible Party, Connor Blake. My mouth went dry. My grip tightened around the paper. I looked back up, trying to catch her eye, but she had already turned away and was singing softly, holding hands between Tyler and neighbor's wife. The room finished the verse, and for a moment, the silence that followed felt heavier than the song itself. Then my father stepped forward and began to speak. Traditions like this, he said, remind us of what matters. Unity, legacy, accountability. That's what Christmas is about. We show up. We carry the weight of the family. We don't hide from it. A few people nodded. My mother smiled. Tyler folded his arms across his chest, eyes locking with mine. I knew what this was. They weren't just cutting me out emotionally. They were cutting me out of the narrative completely. But they were happy to leave me with the fallout, the bills, the responsibilities they didn't want to carry. They had passed the weight to me in silence, in the dark, and wrapped it in Christmas cheer. I turned on my heel and walked back to the hallway, standing near the staircase. No one followed. No one noticed. The circle resumed for the next carol. This time it was Hark! The herald angels sing, cheerful and grand. My absence didn't interrupt a single beat. I unfolded the bill again and studied it. How had they even put my name on this? Who had given the hospital my information? I hadn't spoken to Grandpa in months, not because I didn't want to, but because they kept him isolated, always claiming he was too tired or not feeling up to visitors. I suddenly wondered if that had been a lie too. The air felt heavier now, thick with the kind of tension that exists after a storm has passed, the quiet that follows devastation but precedes revelation. Someone announced dessert was ready, and the room flowed toward the dining area once more. I didn't move. I stayed by the stairs, watching them file past me like extras in someone else's movie. My mother passed by, still smiling politely, chatting with a guest about almond flour and baking temperatures. She didn't glance at me. My father moved slower, speaking with someone in a suit who I vaguely remembered from my childhood. Mr. Douglas, the neighbor 2 houses down who used to sneak me extra candy on Halloween and once taught Tyler how to throw a curveball. Douglas, my dad said, patting him on the back, you've always been more family than half the people in this room. They both laughed, and Douglas beamed proudly. Then my dad raised his glass again and, loud enough for the nearby group to hear, said, you know, if I could have handpicked a son, I would have chosen someone exactly like you. The crowd chuckled, nodding in approval. Hardworking, reliable, loyal. Not like. His voice trailed off as he looked directly at me. The pause said everything. The silence after the joke was longer than the joke itself. Then someone clapped, and the moment dissolved into another wave of polite amusement. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just stared at him, absorbing the hit like a boxer too tired to raise his gloves. My father turned away, already engaged in another conversation. And that was that. It wasn't enough to exclude me. They had to replace me. I followed them slowly to the dining room, where slices of pecan pie and cranberry tarts had already been served. Each plate had a name tag delicately perched on the rim, except mine. I found an empty spot near the edge of the room. No fork, no napkin, just a paper plate with a generic Happy Holidays print. I didn't bother asking why. The answer had been made clear in 100 small ways. As I picked at the crust of a pie slice, I had to grab myself from the kitchen counter. Tyler stood and tapped his glass with a spoon, calling for attention once again. "Okay, everyone," he said, grinning. "Now that we've all stuffed our faces and ruined our diets, it's time for a little family fun." Groans of amusement and excitement rose from the crowd. "We've got a little activity," he continued, reaching beneath the table to retrieve a stack of clipboards, "a family performance review." Laughter erupted immediately, but it wasn't surprised laughter. It was knowing, anticipatory, like they'd done this before. "It's just a bit of holiday honesty," Tyler said, passing the clipboards around. "We rate each other on helpfulness, success, reliability, and, of course, worthiness of inheritance." The words hit like a brick. I froze. No one questioned the absurdity. No one balked. They laughed like it was the most natural thing in the world. The forms were brightly colored, printed with Tyler's company logo at the top and the phrase, "Let's see who makes Santa's legacy list." At the bottom was a chart labeled "Likelihood of Worthy Inheritor," with percentage options ranging from 0% to 100%. Each clipboard had a name already filled in. Mine, unsurprisingly, was the last one handed out. I held it reluctantly. It read, "Performance Review, Connor Blake." There were multiple choice questions, a comment section, and even a rating scale for emotional stability during adversity. I scanned the sheet in disbelief, eyes falling to the pre-filled total at the bottom, 17%. They hadn't even waited to tally responses. My score had already been decided. I looked around, trying to find some shred of shame in someone's face, but they were all too busy pretending this was just harmless fun. Aunt Meredith whispered to someone behind her napkin. My cousin David chuckled while checking boxes on his clipboard. My mother laughed louder than anyone, wiping her eye as if the humor had overwhelmed her. Tyler leaned against the mantel with the ease of a host in his element, surveying the crowd like a king over his court. He caught my eye and winked. "Just a joke," he mouthed. But there was no mirth in his gaze, only power. I looked back at my clipboard, the number 17% now underlined in red. Beneath it, in italicized font, it read, "Room for improvement." My fingers twitched. I wanted to rip it in half, throw it in the fire, scream that they were monsters masquerading as family. But I didn't. I set it gently on the table and stood up. The room kept laughing. No one noticed. Or maybe they noticed and just didn't care. I stepped into the hallway and walked toward the front door, every step louder in my ears than the music and laughter behind me. I paused at the coat rack, not to grab my coat, but to breathe. I didn't want to leave in anger. That's what they expected. I wanted to leave with clarity. And then I heard a voice behind me, low and unfamiliar. I had been cast in a role I never auditioned for, the family scapegoat, the ghost at the feast, and tonight had merely been their final act of erasure. But before I could take one more step toward the door, before I could force my boots over that threshold and back into the snow-covered world where maybe silence hurt less than mockery, the front door blew open behind me with a bang that echoed like thunder through the polished halls. The wind howled in, bringing with it a flurry of snowflakes and a presence so commanding it made everyone in the room pause mid-laughter and turn. There he was, Grandpa Walter, standing tall, regal even at 82, dressed in a crimson suit that shimmered subtly beneath the foyer light, a cane in one hand, and in the other, a wooden box polished to a deep mahogany shine. The kind of box that didn't carry gifts, it carried declarations. His eyes scanned the room, not with warmth but calculation, and in that moment, every guest instinctively stood, chairs scraping, murmurs silencing. Everyone stood, except me, not out of disrespect, but disbelief. I hadn't seen him in over a year, Not since they tucked him away in that care facility and told me he was too tired, too sick to visit. And yet, there he was. Not tired, not frail, but sharper than any man in that room. His eyes found me quickly. He didn't smile. He simply nodded once. Then he walked forward, slow but deliberate, the cane striking the hardwood in rhythmic defiance, his suit brushing against the wind like a royal banner. My father moved first, stepping toward him with arms outstretched, voice overly sweet. "Dad, we didn't think clearly." Grandpa Walter cut him off, voice firm, unshaken. He reached the center of the room, every eye glued to him, and with a heavy breath, he set the wooden box on the coffee table with a thud that seemed to reverberate off the walls. "I wasn't planning to come," he said, glancing around. "Then I received this." He pulled from his coat pocket a crumpled copy of the ridiculous performance review form. My name printed at the top, the score, 17%, still clearly visible. The room went still. "I thought," he continued, "that tonight was a family gathering, a celebration of tradition. Instead, I find you've turned it into a circus." Tyler shifted uncomfortably. My mother looked down. My father attempted to speak, but Grandpa Walter raised a hand and silenced him like a judge calling order in a courtroom. "I built this family's foundation with my hands," he said, voice rising just slightly. "And I watched it grow. But somewhere along the way, some of you forgot that it wasn't money or prestige that made this family strong. It was loyalty, it was integrity, and it was sacrifice." He turned his gaze toward me then, holding it with steel resolve. "There's only one person in this room who never stopped being honest, who never once tried to buy affection or sell out his blood for approval." The crowd shifted again, all eyes flicking toward me now, but not in pity this time. In confusion, curiosity, maybe even fear. "Connor," he said, "stand up." I rose slowly, the envelope from the stranger still in my hand. "Come here," he commanded, and I walked forward, the tension in the room so thick it felt like walking through water. He opened the wooden box slowly. Inside were several neatly stacked documents, a leather binder, a set of keys on a silver ring, and an envelope sealed with wax. He removed the binder first and handed it to me. "These," he said, "are the ownership papers to this house. Transferred 6 months ago. I didn't tell anyone because I was watching. I needed to know who deserved what. Now I know." A murmur ran through the crowd. My father stepped forward, voice cracking. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," Grandpa Walter snapped back. "Everything in that box, the house, the estate assets, my business shares, it all goes to Connor. Effective immediately." My mother gasped. Tyler took a step back, face draining of color. "He's not ready for that," Tyler said quickly. "He's unstable. He doesn't understand how things work. He understands enough to know not to treat his family like a joke." Grandpa fired back. "He understands enough to show up without expecting applause." He turned again to me. "When I was in the hospital last spring, the only person who tried to visit me was Connor. But he was turned away, told I was too ill. I wasn't. I just wasn't allowed to see him. My calls were intercepted, my mail censored. They thought they were protecting me. No, they were controlling me." The silence was total now. No one breathed. No one moved. I've spent the last 3 months undoing the damage, meeting with lawyers, revising everything. The will, the business structure, this house's deed. I made sure that the person who showed true heart, not status, would carry on my legacy. My father's hand trembled on the back of a dining chair. My mother looked like she had swallowed acid. Tyler stared at me like I had just crawled out from under the floorboards and stolen his crown. But it wasn't over. Not yet, because something still buzzed in my pocket, something unfinished, unresolved. The envelope, the one the stranger gave me. I pulled it out slowly, hesitated, then turned toward Grandpa Walter. Someone handed me this earlier. I said, lifting the plain, wax-sealed envelope. Said it was important. He looked at it, expression unreadable, then reached forward and took it from my hand. The wax broke with a crisp snap, and he unfolded the papers inside. His eyes scanned quickly, efficiently. The longer he read, the more his brows furrowed. The room had gone deadly quiet, all conversations strangled mid-breath. Then his lips pressed into a thin, grim line. "Tyler," he said without looking up, "were you last April when I was admitted to St. Helena Medical Center?" Tyler blinked, startled. "What?" "Don't stall. Answer the question." We were all involved," Tyler stammered. "Mom said you needed rest, and Dad coordinated with the doctors, and Grandpa held up the paper, then explained this." He handed the printout to the room. I couldn't see all the details, but what was clearly visible at the top was a chain of emails dated last spring between Tyler and my father. Subjects like fund transfer approval, isolation protocol, and legal guardianship draft jumped off the page like flashing lights. Grandpa raised his voice slightly to cut through the murmurs. "This is a record of every email, every bank transaction, and even audio files from your so-called conference calls. You two conspired to declare me mentally unfit, to block Connor from visiting, and to funnel control of my accounts into a joint shell company in Tyler's name." Gasps echoed. A fork clattered to the floor. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, but not before her face betrayed something far worse than shock, recognition. "No," Tyler said, his voice cracking. "That's not. There's context. There always is," Grandpa said, and this time the heat in his voice could have scorched the carpet. "Like the audio file attached to this report. Do you want me to play it?" He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and held it up. Tyler lunged forward. "Don't," but it was too late. A familiar voice, my father's, crackled from the speaker. "We just need a few signatures, nothing official. Walter's not checking his mail, and if we keep Connor out of the loop, no one will challenge it. By the time the new will is processed, the assets are already moved." Then Tyler's voice chimed in. "Connor's irrelevant. Always has been. He'll cry about it for a while, but he's not a fighter. That's what makes this easy." The room exploded. Chaos ripped through the air like lightning. Gasps, accusations, chairs pushed back violently. Guests murmured to one another, some backing away from Tyler, others staring in horror. Aunt Meredith looked ready to faint. Cousin David cursed under his breath. My mother sat down slowly, face pale as porcelain. My father tried to speak, to raise his hands in defense, but Grandpa slammed his cane on the hardwood floor. "Enough!" The sound cracked through the air. Silence fell again, tense and ragged. "Do you understand what you've done?" Grandpa's voice shook now, but not with weakness, with fury restrained by dignity. "You plotted to erase me. You tried to lock me in a private ward and strip my rights away. And you used this holiday as your victory lap, as if no one would ever find out. You turned my legacy into a sick joke and made Connor your scapegoat for everything you didn't have the courage to face yourselves." He turned to Tyler specifically, pointing the cane like a sword. "You had potential once, real grit, but you sold it for approval and influence, and you thought I was too old, too tired to see it." Tyler's eyes brimmed with desperation. "Grandpa, I swear don't." "Swear nothing," Grandpa snapped. "Because the paperwork is real. The voice is real. And so are the consequences." He reached into the wooden box again and pulled out another document. A revocation of power of attorney. A signed order naming Connor as sole successor and legal steward of all remaining estate operations. "You're out," Grandpa said to Tyler. "Legally, financially, personally. If you ever step foot into this house again without Connor's permission, I'll have security escort you out like the thief you become." Tyler reeled like he'd been struck. My father stood motionless, then sat down heavily, as if aging 5 years in that instant. Grandpa turned to the rest of the room, his voice softer now. If any of you were complicit, if you sat silent while they orchestrated this, you know where the door is. People shifted uncomfortably. A few guests quietly grabbed their coats and left. Others remained, stunned. I stood motionless, trying to process everything from the envelope in my hand to the digital echoes of betrayal that had just filled the room. The crowd that had once applauded his every word, clinked glasses in his honor, and chuckled at his jokes now avoided eye contact like his guilt might be contagious. The room was no longer a party. It was a courtroom, and Tyler had just been sentenced. He cleared his throat and tried to speak, raising his hands in that pleading motion he'd perfected over years of manipulation. Look, you're twisting things. Those recordings, they're taken out of context. We were protecting Grandpa. He was sick. He was confused. We were trying to manage everything for his own good. His voice cracked on the last words, and it wasn't theatrical this time. It was desperation. Real, sinking, raw desperation. But no one bit. Not even the neighbors. Not even Aunt Meredith, who had always defended him like a second mother. Her face was pale, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, eyes on the floor. The silence mocked him louder than any accusation could. Then Mr. Douglas, the neighbor Dad had praised earlier, stepped forward. "You told me Grandpa was in Switzerland," he said flatly, looking Tyler dead in the eyes. "You said he was visiting extended family, resting. Let's believe he was on vacation while you were locking him away and bleeding his accounts." "We didn't bleed anything," Tyler snapped back, the old edge creeping back into his tone, but it was shaky now, brittle. "We just redirected assets. It was temporary." "You lied," Douglas said again. "And you used Connor's name on hospital paperwork so we wouldn't ask questions." My wife felt guilty for months, thinking we'd ignored Grandpa's birthday. "You made her cry over dinner." "I was trying to fix things," Tyler shouted. All pretense gone now, the mask sliding off. "You don't know what it's like managing all of this, try to live up to Dad, to this family, to the name." He turned sharply toward me then, eyes blazing. "You were never here, Connor. You disappeared, while I stayed, while I held everything together. I earned this. I deserve it." His voice broke like glass. "Not you. Never you. I said nothing. I didn't have to." The silence spoke louder than any defense. The truth had already unraveled everything. Grandpa stepped forward, cane tapping the floor with authority. "You think loyalty is measured by attendance?" he asked Tyler quietly. "You think showing up to collect applause while planning to seat behind closed doors makes you a man?" He shook his head. "You've been playing house with my legacy, Tyler. You didn't hold anything together. You manipulated it, twisted it, poisoned it." Then his eyes moved to Dad. "And you," he said, voice heavier now, not angry but steeped in disappointment. "You were supposed to know better. I raised you. I taught you that family doesn't mean control. It means responsibility." Dad looked at him, face pale, jaw tight, refusing to break, but no longer defiant. "He was struggling," Dad said quietly. "Connor had problems. He left. He didn't call. He gave up on us." "He didn't give up," Grandpa replied without hesitation. "You push him away. You watched him sink and blamed him for drowning. And instead of helping, you handed him weights." My mother finally spoke then, her voice trembling. "We didn't know what else to do. We were scared." Grandpa's gaze didn't soften. "Then you should have been honest about it. Instead, you chose to punish him in silence." A neighbor couple excused themselves quietly, gathering their coats and murmuring something about not feeling well. Another family followed, then another. In less than 10 minutes, half the room had emptied. No hugs, no golambis, just solemn looks and quiet exits. The show was over. The audience had seen too much. Tyler slumped onto a chair, burying his face in his hands, the humiliation finally too heavy to hold upright. Dad remained standing, hands on his hips, staring blankly at the floor. I stood still, not gloating, not smiling, just absorbing the moment. Grandpa turned to the remaining guests. Anyone who wishes to stay may do so, but I suggest you ask yourself what you came here to celebrate. He turned back to me. Connor, this is your house now. I'll be transferring the utilities and deed this week. The business lawyers are ready to finalize asset control under your name. I nodded, still unable to find words. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like awakening. Like the curtain had finally dropped and the truth had flooded in too fast to process. You can do with it what you want, Grandpa added. Sell it, burn it, rebuild it, but don't let their actions dictate your worth. I looked at him, the man I once thought I'd lost forever to old age and manipulation, and saw strength. Not the kind that barked orders or threw money around, but the kind that watched, waited, and struck when the time was right. The room was quieter than I had ever known it, stripped bare of its performative laughter and hollow cheer. Half the guests had gone home, unable to stomach the scandal that had unfolded before their eyes, leaving behind an atmosphere that felt less like Christmas and more like the aftermath of a storm that had knocked down the tallest tree in town. Plates still cluttered the dining table. Candles burned lower, but the heart of the house was no longer Tyler's smug grin or Dad's authoritative presence. It was the steady pulse of truth that had finally forced its way in. Grandpa Walter tapped his cane once against the floor, the sound sharp, commanding. Connor, he said, take your place. At first, I didn't move. Old habits resisted, the weight of years spent shoved to the margins, whispering that it was another trick, another cruel setup. But the silence around me held, and when I lifted my head, I saw not smirks or rolling eyes, but raw faces stripped of certainty. Even Tyler, slouched at the end of the table, couldn't muster defiance now. So I walked forward, step by step, each footfall louder in my own ears than the storm outside, until I reached the chair at the head of the table. My father's chair, the one I had never been allowed to touch, much less sit in. For a moment I hovered, the past screaming that I had no right. But then Grandpa gestured firmly. Sit, he said, and I did. The leather was cold at first, but then it warmed under me, not because the chair had changed, but because the weight I carried into it was no longer shame. It was presence. I was no longer invisible. The table stretched before me, filled with people who once erased me, now forced to see me. Grandpa lifted his glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the firelight. To those, he said, voice steady and deliberate, who value truth over appearances, may you always find the strength to stand alone if it means standing right. For the first time that night, I felt the words reach me, not as decoration, not as performance, but as an anchor. I picked up my own glass of water, lifted it, and held it high. To truth, I echoed. Some guests raised their glasses half-heartedly. My mother barely touched hers, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. My father hadn't returned from the kitchen. Tyler sat motionless, staring into the empty space where power used to sit so comfortably in his hands. There was no applause, no forced cheer, only silence, broken by the faint crackle of the fireplace. And yet, that silence was not my enemy anymore. It was proof that the performance was over, that masks had been ripped away, that what was left, as uncomfortable as it was finally real. I glanced around the table and realized that the inheritance wasn't just the house, the deeds, or the business shares. It was this moment, the moment where I was no longer erased, no longer the shadow. It was recognition. It was the space to exist without apology. Grandpa leaned closer to me, his hand briefly resting on mine. They'll come to terms with it, or they won't, he whispered. But either way, you've taken your place. His words weren't a command, they were a release. And for the first time in years, I felt free of the chains of invisibility. As the night wound down, one by one, people slipped out the door without goodbyes, unable to bear the weight of what had been revealed. Eventually, only Grandpa and I remained at the table. The candles had burned to stubs, the plates sat cold, and the snow outside muffled the world into quiet stillness. You know, Grandpa said softly, legacy isn't what we leave in wills. It's what we leave in people. He paused, letting the words settle. And tonight, you proved you're stronger than the lies that tried to erase you. I looked back at him, feeling the truth of it sink deep. I didn't win tonight, I said quietly. I just survived it. And sometimes, he replied with a small smile, that's the greater victory. We sat in silence a little longer, two survivors of the same betrayal, bound not by blood alone, but by truth fought for and reclaimed. At last, I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the snow. The world outside seemed fresh again, unmarked, waiting. And for the first time in years, I believed I could step into it without carrying their shadows. Behind me, the head of the table no longer felt like a throne stolen. It felt like a place earned. The end. If you stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. Telling it wasn't easy, but I wanted to share every raw moment so you could feel what I felt being excluded, humiliated, and finally standing up when the truth came out. If you found this story moving, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me keep telling stories like this. Now I want to hear from you. What did you think about the plot? Did the ending feel satisfying to you? Or would you have wanted to see Tyler and my father face even harsher consequences? And where are you watching from tonight? I love seeing how far these stories travel, and it makes me feel less alone knowing you're out there listening. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them, and who knows, maybe your perspective will inspire the next story I share.